Anxiety, a constant feeling of sadness, change in daily behavior, these are all symptoms of depression. When you go to the zoo, is this what you're thinking? What about these animals in captivity? That's what they're going through. Zoos should be banned, or at least try to mitigate the things that are occurring to them. As a biologist, I've looked into why these zoos aren't the animal heavens we think that they are. Suffering isn't acceptable in any way, shape, or form, and the suffering that zoos cause in animals are a form that we can control. The three most important reasons why zoos should be banned are that zoos subject captive animals to inbreeding, lowered life expectancy, and depression. Alright, so the first place to begin is inbreeding. Animals in captivity are bound to inbred at some point in their existence, and it can have dire effects. According to a nonprofit agency dedicated to saving tigers, Big Cat Rescue states, in places like national parks and zoos, inbreeding is bound to happen. They openly acknowledge that inbreeding occurs to some level within zoos. It could be assumed that this may not have that great of an effect on the majority of zoo animals, but is still harmful to those who experience it. When animals breed with close relatives, the recessive genes tend to expose themselves due to genetic inheritance. Typically, disease genes are recessive, so that when parents with these two genes interbreed, they produce an offspring that is susceptible to autosomal recessive genes. These recessive genes include sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, and much others, which ultimately shorten the lifespan of these animals. The mortality of inbred animals is much higher than the percentage of non-inbred animals. New York Times investigated the mortality rate of different animals in zoos and found that of 380 inbred young, 50% died within 6 months, compared to 534 young zoo animals that were not inbred, which only 25% died. A whole 25% more animals died in captivity. A whole 25% more animals die in early death when they're inbred. The overall fitness and survivability is reduced when inbreeding occurs. My second point is that zoos are unable to accommodate a majority of their animals. Zoos' limited space provide a large strain on these animals. Basel studied the effect that this had on Amur tigers in the wild and came to the conclusion that the tigers' mortality rates and their time spent pacing higher was compared to tigers in the wild. Tigers paced for an average of 16.4% of observed time and experienced infant mortality rates of 32%. This pacing comes as a result of a combination of anxiousness and boredom. These animals are just forced to walk around, and that's all that they do. Zoos aren't able to keep up with the diets of animals they foster either. A Venezuelan zoo was unable to feed their lions and began feeding them fruits and vegetables, something that these animals can't persist upon due to their naturally carnivorous states. Curacao staffers were feeding their tigers mangoes and pumpkins, which didn't provide them with enough nutrients and ultimately caused these tigers to lose weight on a massive scale. Third, animals are ultimately dependent on us. Zoos force animals to interact with each other. They force that animals of different packs or animals that may not necessarily like each other interact and ultimately can cause fighting. For captive animals, we restrict what they can do and who they can socialize with. We separate them from their families and friends, and we decide who they can mate with or deny them access to a mate entirely. They have a completely artificial environment. Third, animals in zoos aren't prepared to go back into the wild after they get done with their rehab. Animals in captivity tend to stay in captivity or die there. The overall release rate for animals receiving care was 50.2%. 45.4% were either euthanized or died during the treatment. Treatment is often difficult due to the wild nature of these animals. They're not domesticated, which causes them to lash out when trying to receive treatment that may be for their best selves. When animals are reintroduced, they typically die off more easily than other animals. According to National Geographic, the percentage of tigers and wolves that survive when returned to the wild is 33%. Their motive and drive is often stripped away from these animals due to the feeding techniques and their dependency on humans. They just sit around and wait for food. And lastly, zoochosis prevents them from being able to reintroduce themselves. So zoochosis just defines a stereotypic set of behaviors such as walking around, prancing, and that's what those animals experience. That brings me to the end of my speech. Zoos should be banned because they have bad breeding techniques, aren't able to accommodate their animals and their needs, and cause problems for rehab. Zoos should be banned, but what we can do is form petitions, band together, and try to consult these massive organizations and try to get them to better themselves. Thank you.